My daughter gave me a simple choice: serve her entitled husband or leave the house my wife and I paid for. I smiled, grabbed my old suitcase, and spent the next week quietly dismantling their entire life of financial privilege piece by piece. Before continuing, write where you are from or what time it is. When my daughter Charlotte shouted, "You will either serve my husband or get out of my house," the sound felt like a gunshot fired in the confined space of our living room. It was sharp, loud, and final. I did not respond in anger. Instead, I simply looked down at the heavy plastic grocery bags, the handles cutting deep red marks into my palms, took a breath that tasted like dust and furniture polish, and smiled a slow, deliberate smile. I took my suitcase, retrieved from the bedroom closet, and walked straight out of the front door, leaving behind the house I had paid for with my life. I knew Charlotte was waiting for the usual scene: the crumpling, the shame, the pathetic apology, the shuffling back to the kitchen like a beaten dog returning to its corner. But this time, everything was different. This time, I was leaving with my dignity intact. I had just pushed through the front door of my own home, the Saturday afternoon light filtering through the worn living room curtains. The light was usually a soft spring glow that made me appreciate my home, but today it was cold and exposing. My keys were still warm in my palm, and the heavy grocery bags were making my wrists ache. Victor, my 30-year-old son-in-law, was exactly where he always was, sprawled in my favorite leather recliner. It was the last piece of furniture Clara, my late wife, had insisted on buying me before the cancer finally took her. Victor's stocking feet were propped up on the footrest, a half-empty beer bottle dangling precariously from his fingers. The remote control rested on his belly like a declaration of ownership, which I suppose he truly believed he possessed. He didn't even bother to look up from the noisy basketball game playing on my large-screen TV. "Grab me another beer from the fridge while you're up," he commanded, his eyes glued to the screen. I set the grocery bags down slowly, carefully, right in the middle of the antique Persian rug Clara loved. I could feel the weight of the milk cartons and the bread loaves settling on the soft fiber. "Excuse me?" I asked. Victor's eyes stayed fixed on the television screen. "You heard me. Corona? Not that cheap stuff you drink. And make sure it's cold." A heavy, cold dread settled deep in my gut, heavier and colder than the grocery bags I had just set down. I had bought those Coronas specifically for him that afternoon, spending a chunk of my limited Social Security money on beer I would never touch, trying to keep the peace. "Victor, I just walked in," I said, trying to maintain an even banking floor professional tone. "I need to put these groceries away. The dairy is going to spoil." Now he finally looked at me. His face carried that familiar expression, the one that said I was being unreasonable, difficult, and deliberately challenging his authority. "What's the big deal, old man? You're already standing. I'm comfortable. Do the simple task I asked you to do." "The big deal is that this is my house," I stated clearly. Victor's feet hit the floor with a jarring thud. He stood slowly, uncoiling his large, broad body, using his 6'2" height advantage like a physical weapon. At 30, he was much bigger than me, but I had been dealing with difficult, entitled people long before he was born. "Your house?" he smirked, the sound grating. "Funny, because your daughter and I live here. We pay the bills with my money. Details?" He stepped closer, the half-empty beer still sloshing in his hand. The smell of cheap alcohol and stale sweat on his breath was a physical wall between us. "Look, Adam, we can do this the easy way or the hard way," he hissed. "You want to keep living here peacefully? You play ball. Simple as that. You do what I say." The kitchen door swung open just then, the noise startling. Charlotte appeared, her blonde hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, a dish towel still clutched tightly in her hands. She took in the entire scene, Victor towering over me, the untouched groceries, the tension thick enough to choke on. "What's going on?" Her voice carried that familiar low warning tone I remembered so well from her troubled teenage years whenever she was mediating a fight she couldn't control. "Your father's being difficult," Victor said without taking his eyes off me. "I asked him to get me a beer, and he's making it into some kind of federal case just to cause trouble." Charlotte looked at me with a wave of severe disappointment, like I was a child acting out during dinner. "Dad, just get him the beer," she sighed, exasperated. "It's not worth fighting over a single drink." But Victor wasn't done. He pushed the advantage, moving closer still. "See, Adam, here's how it's going to work. You live in our house. You contribute. That means when I ask you to do something, you do it. No questions, no attitude. Our house." "Our house," I repeated, testing the words, feeling the floorboards creak under my feet, the sound loud in the tense silence. Charlotte stepped deliberately beside her husband, presenting a cold, united front. "Dad, you need to decide right now," she stated, her voice devoid of any warmth. "Either you help Victor and do what he asks, or you can pack your things and leave." The words hung in the air like smoke. The verdict was in. I looked at my daughter, searching her eyes for any hint of the little girl who used to climb into my lap during thunderstorms. She stared back with Victor's same entitled, vacant expression. The vulnerability ping hit me. The sudden, intense shame of having failed so completely in raising a daughter who could give her widowed father such a cruel ultimatum. "All right," I said quietly, the word barely audible. Victor smirked, the arrogance flooding his face. "Good. Now, about that beer. I'll pack." The smirk died on his face instantly. The victory was ashes in his mouth. Charlotte's mouth fell open slightly. She'd expected me to crumble, to apologize, to shuffle to the kitchen like a beaten dog. I turned toward the hallway, leaving the grocery bags where they sat. Behind me, I heard Victor's sharp, surprised intake of breath. "Dad, wait!" Charlotte whispered desperately. I kept walking toward my bedroom, my footsteps steady on the hardwood floor Clara and I had painstakingly refinished together 20 years ago. The large, dark suitcase came down from the closet shelf with a soft thump. I'd bought it for our honeymoon to Yellowstone, back when Clara was still alive, and the future stretched ahead like an open, endless road. Now it gaped empty on the bed, a dark maw waiting to swallow what remained of my life here. I packed methodically. Underwear, socks, 3 changes of clothes, a few necessities. Not everything, just enough. From the living room, I heard the low murmur of urgent whispers, Victor's voice occasionally rising above Charlotte's softer, frantic tones. They were already figuring out what to do, how to handle the old man's unexpected, decisive rebellion. My hands moved without conscious thought. I folded shirts, rolled ties. Clara's favorite photo went into the side pocket, wrapped securely in tissue paper. I added my medications, my reading glasses, and the small leather journal where I tracked my expenses. When I wheeled the suitcase down the hallway, the whispering stopped instantly. Victor was back in his chair, but his posture was different now. Alert, coiled, watchful. Charlotte stood frozen by the kitchen doorway, arms crossed, trying to look stern, but failing to hide her uncertainty and fear. Neither of them said goodbye. My old sedan, reliable as always, started on the first try. I backed slowly out of the driveway without a single glance back at the house, feeling the loose gravel crunch under the tires. The 30-minute drive to the Riverbend Inn gave me time to think, to let the shock of the ultimatum subside. My immediate goal was simple: survival and finding a secure, permanent emotional and financial perimeter. I drove through downtown Riverton, and the financial memories came in waves. Charlotte's college tuition. I'd worked overtime at the bank for 4 straight years to cover the high cost. Her wedding had cost me a shocking $25,000. Victor's family couldn't afford their required half, so I'd covered the whole thing quietly, not wanting to embarrass anyone. Then came the house. $80,000. From my retirement savings for their down payment because young couples needed help getting started, the monthly payments followed like clockwork. $200 for their mortgage, $300 for utilities, $500 for groceries when money got tight. My Social Security check disappeared into their lives piece by piece, and I'd convinced myself it was love and devotion. I let out a long, shuddering exhale, the promise burning hotter than any immediate fear. Never again. The Riverbend Inn sat on the outskirts of town, a low building with faded peeling paint and a neon sign that flickered intermittently. The room was small but clean. I set my suitcase on the luggage rack and sat heavily on the mattress edge. The silence here was different. Not the comfortable quiet of my own home, but the hollow, cold emptiness of a temporary space. I pulled out my phone. Tomorrow was Sunday, but some things could still be done, even with limited banking hours. I opened my laptop on the small table. Account balances glowed on the screen, representing a lifetime of careful, cautious financial planning. The cursor blinked in the search bar, waiting for me to choose what came next. I needed to cut the financial cord. Every wire, every automatic transfer, every single expense they had leveraged against my goodwill in retirement. Tomorrow, the accounts that bled me dry would go silent. Sunday morning arrived, gray and overcast, perfectly matching my grim, cold mood. I spread my paperwork across the motel table like a general planning a campaign. Bank statements, insurance policies, legal documents. Everything was organized. Everything was within reach. My immediate goal was to financially isolate Charlotte and Victor before Monday morning, severing every link. The first call went to Riverbank. Automated systems never slept, especially for a former employee. "Good morning, Mr. Vance," the automated representative said after I navigated the phone tree. "I need to cancel the automatic mortgage payment for 847 Pine Street, the account ending in Fort White 29, I stated clearly. A pause followed. Computer keys clicked, a rhythmic, mechanical sound. "Sir, I show that payment has been active for 5 years. Are you sure you want to discontinue it?" "Completely sure," I replied. "The homeowners no longer qualify for my financial assistance." "Very well, Mr. Vance. The automatic payment will be canceled effective immediately. You should receive written confirmation within 3 business days." I hung up. Clean, quiet, and final. The second call was even easier. Continental had been insuring both their cars on my policy for 3 years. Victor's heavy truck, Charlotte's smaller sedan. It cost me $280 every month for vehicles I never drove, coverage for accidents I'd never cause. "I need to remove 2 vehicles from my policy," I told the agent. "My daughter and son-in-law will need to establish their own coverage. When would you like this change to take effect?" "Today," I said. The credit cards took the longest. Charlotte was an authorized user on 3 of my accounts, and I'd been paying $500 monthly on balances I'd never created, purchases I'd never made. "Mr. Vance, removing authorized users will require them to apply for their own credit," the Visa representative explained. "Any outstanding balances will remain your responsibility, but they won't be able to make new charges." "I understand." "Remove them immediately." Each call felt like a physical weight lifting from my shoulders. My 30 years of banking experience had taught me the system's intricate ins and outs, the precise legal language, and the proper procedures. Everything I was doing was completely within my rights. I paused only for the final, more profound task: the life insurance. The $100,000 policy that was supposed to go to Charlotte, money I'd earned to protect my family's future. Family meant something entirely different now. I started the written documentation process to change the beneficiary to a charity. By noon, I'd made 8 calls. Mortgage payments stopped, insurance canceled, credit cards blocked, the automatic transfers that had been bleeding my accounts dry for years. All of it ended. I sat back in the cheap motel chair, looking at the collected confirmation numbers and reference codes, the paper trail of my newfound financial independence. My phone sat silent on the table. No missed calls, no urgent messages. They didn't know yet. They probably wouldn't know until the first payment bounced, or the first bill arrived with their names on it instead of mine. But they would know soon enough. I closed my laptop and walked to the window. Across the parking lot, I watched an elderly man loading suitcases into a pickup truck, his wife directing the operation with gentle efficiency. I envied their easy partnership. Clara and I had been like that once. My phone buzzed against the table. Unknown number. I let it ring. My stomach tightened. The prolonged waiting was the worst part of the strategy. The week passed quietly for me. I settled into a routine at the Riverbend Inn. coffee from the lobby, breakfast at the diner down the street, long walks around Riverton's quiet, tree-lined neighborhoods. My phone accumulated missed calls like a collection I had no interest in starting. By Wednesday, there were 12 messages. By Friday, 22. I listened to them in chronological order, tracking the progression from confusion to anger to outright desperation. The first few were almost casual. Charlotte asking if there was some kind of banking error with the mortgage. Victor left brief, annoyed messages about the car insurance lapsing. But by the middle of the week, panic had crept into their voices. "Dad, what the hell is going on?" Charlotte's voice cracked with raw frustration. "The bank says you stopped the automatic payment. They want the full amount by Friday, or they'll start foreclosure proceedings." Victor's messages grew increasingly aggressive. "Adam, you need to fix this right now. I've got people asking questions about my insurance. You're making us look like deadbeats." The later calls bordered on pleading. Charlotte was crying, promising they'd work something out if I just called them back. Victor tried a different approach, claiming he'd been too harsh and wanted to make things right. I deleted each message after listening, feeling nothing but a mild clinical curiosity about their growing desperation. My immediate goal was secure. They were cornered and exposed. Thursday morning brought a hard, insistent knock at my motel room door. Through the peephole, I saw them both. Charlotte in a wrinkled sweater, Victor in his work clothes, both looking like they'd slept badly and hadn't showered properly. I opened the door but stood firmly, making no motion to invite them in. "Dad!" Charlotte's eyes were red-rimmed. "We need to talk." Victor pushed forward, his face flushed with anger and stress. "About what?" I asked calmly, my voice flat. "About the fact that you're trying to ruin our lives over some stupid argument about a beer," Victor shouted, his voice echoing in the hallway. I looked Victor straight in the eyes. "I'm not trying to ruin anything," I said calmly, crossing my arms. "I'm simply no longer paying for your lives." "The mortgage, Adam!" Victor's voice rose to a scream. "You can't just stop paying the mortgage, that's our house." I let a single, long silence hang in the air, allowing the simple truth to land. "Actually, it's my house. My name is on the deed, my signature is on the loan. You two were just guests." Charlotte quickly grabbed Victor's arm as he took a threatening step closer to the door. "Dad, please, we can work this out. Victor was wrong to talk to you that way. We both were." Her sudden, forced apology was a new, dangerous vulnerability. "But you can't just leave us with no warning, no discussion," she pleaded, tears starting again. "You gave me an ultimatum," I reminded her, the memory of her entitled stare sharp in my mind. "Do what Victor says or get out." "Those were your exact words." "I didn't mean it like that." "Yes, you did," I countered, looking at the stranger wearing my daughter's face. "You meant every word. You just didn't expect me to choose option 2. Victor tried a different angle, his voice dropping to an artificial calm. "Look, we all said things we didn't mean. But you're talking about our home, our credit, our whole lives. You can't just pull the rug out like this." I put my hand on the cold metal door, beginning to close it. The knob felt solid, a new anchor in my world. "I can, and I did. You wanted me to leave. I left. You wanted to handle your own lives. Now you can." "Dad, wait!" Charlotte's voice broke completely. "What about family? What about everything we've been through together?" I paused, looking at her desperate face. "That little girl," I said quietly, the intimacy line, had grown into someone who could stand by while her husband humiliated her father in his own living room. "Family works both ways, sweetheart," I said, a final, definitive line drawn in the dirt. "I spent 5 years taking care of you both. When it was time for you to take care of me, you chose him instead." Victor's fake composure cracked like cheap plaster. "You crazy old bastard, you can't just—" "I can call the police if you keep raising your voice," I interrupted, my voice sharp and final. "This is private property and you're disturbing the peace." They stared at me, probably seeing me clearly for the first time in years. Not the soft-hearted father or the convenient bank account, but a man who had finally learned to say no. Victor grabbed Charlotte's elbow. "Come on, we'll figure this out ourselves." He walked back to their car, his swagger replaced by a worried, desperate hunch. Charlotte looked back at me over her shoulder like she was seeing a stranger. I watched them drive away, then closed the door and returned to my laptop. There were still calls to make, still accounts to close. The work of dismantling a relationship was far from finished. I realized the next step wasn't merely about money, it was about protecting my legal position. The eviction was filed, but Victor's aggression worried me. I needed to secure the house before they tried something truly desperate or destructive. I needed coffee and a chance to think clearly about the next move. The Main Street Diner had always been my refuge when Clara was alive. Tuesday morning found me walking the familiar 3 blocks from the Riverbend Inn, my breath visible in the crisp mountain air. I had reviewed bank statements and confirmation numbers again this morning, the figures cold and hard, like a general studying battle plans. The diner's brass bell chimed as I entered. Coffee steam and bacon grease created that comfortable fog of normalcy I craved. I had barely settled into my usual corner booth when a familiar voice cut through the background hum. Adam Vance. Well, I'll be damned. George Maxwell, my former colleague, rose from a table near the window. We'd worked together at Riverbank for 15 years. George had handled commercial loans while I managed personal accounts. "George," I said, standing to shake his hand. "Good to see you. Heard you moved out to the Riverbend Inn. Everything all right?" George slid into the opposite seat, his eyes sharp. I used the interruption of the waitress bringing coffee to decide what to share. George was trustworthy, but he was also a banker with professional obligations. "Family situation," I said finally, picking my words carefully. Needed some space to think things through. George nodded slowly, studying my face over the rim of his cup. "That son-in-law of yours tried to pull a fast one on us a few months back." My coffee cup stopped halfway to my lips, leaving a wet ring on the counter. "What kind of fast one?" "Wanted a home equity loan on your house." 50,000 twackers, George said, his expression hardening. Claimed it was his property, brought in documentation and everything. The diner's ambient noise seemed to fade into a distant buzz. My house? He claimed he owned my house. The sudden thought made my heart hammer against my ribs. That's right, had some paperwork that looked official at first glance, but when we ran the title search, George shook his head slowly. Everything came back to you, of course. Clean title, no co-signers, nothing that would give him any claim to the property. I set my cup down carefully, trying to process the chilling depth of this betrayal. When exactly did this happen? December, maybe January. I handled the application personally because of the amount involved. George leaned forward, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "Adam, he wasn't just mistaken about ownership. This was deliberate fraud. The documents he brought in were forged." The implications hit me like a splash of cold water. 3 months ago, Victor had been actively planning to steal a wine-tiam 50,000 don from me using a fraudulent deed. This was not merely desperation. This was premeditated, calculated deception. "Did you report it?" "We rejected the application and flagged his information in our system," George explained. "Technically, since no money changed hands, it's a gray area legally, but I kept copies of everything." The knowledge was leverage. "You really didn't know about this?" George's eyes were searching mine, confirming my ignorance. I shook my head, thinking about all those monthly mortgage payments, all the dinners where Victor had complained about money troubles while planning to rob me behind my back. What was he going to use the money for? George glanced around the diner, then leaned closer still. According to his application, home improvements, but word around town is Victor's got gambling debts, pretty substantial ones. How substantial? The coffee cup felt small and fragile in my hand. Jim might know more. "You remember Detective Finn? He mentioned something about Victor being a regular at the local casino." I did remember Detective Finn. We'd served on the church building committee together. "George, I appreciate you telling me this, more than you know." "Adam, be careful," George warned, his voice low. A man who'd forged documents to steal from family might do other desperate things when he's cornered. I walked back to the Riverbend Inn with my mind racing. Victor's disrespect suddenly made chilling sense. He had already seen me as a mark, a convenient aging source of cash for his gambling habit. The ultimatum wasn't about establishing dominance, it was about maintaining access to a vault he was already trying to loot. Back in my motel room, I opened my laptop and created a new document titled Victor Thompson Evidence. George's revelation was just the beginning. If Victor had been lying about this, what else had he been hiding? The stakes had just escalated from personal dignity to outright criminal fraud. My immediate goal shifted from merely leaving to actively seeking legal recourse to protect my property and myself. The Flathead County Courthouse closed at 5 p.m. I had 1 hour to file the paperwork that would change everything, making the eviction official and preempting any legal moves Victor might try based on his forged documents. After a quick cold lunch, I drove straight to the courthouse. The clerk's office was on the second floor. A middle-aged woman processed my eviction notice with professional efficiency, the action a clean mechanical beat. "Mr. Vance, you understand this is your daughter's residence?" She reviewed the property deed I'd provided. "It's my property. The residents have violated the terms of their occupancy." "What terms would those be?" "Verbal agreement requiring mutual respect and contribution to household expenses," I replied, prepared for this question. "Both conditions have been breached." She stamped the papers with practiced authority. Thump, thump. The sound was final, a victory in paperwork. "A 30-day notice period begins today," she said. "If they contest, we'll schedule a hearing. Otherwise, the sheriff will serve final papers after the deadline." "How long before they receive this?" "Sheriff's Department handles service, usually within 48 hours. I thanked her and collected my copies, feeling the immense weight of legal authority behind my actions. No more financial manipulation or emotional blackmail. Everything was going through proper channels. Now my next stop was the police station. The forged deed and the gambling rumors needed to become part of the official record. I had a name, a contact, and a plan that was clicking into place like a loaded magazine. I was going to find out exactly how deep Victor's debts ran. Detective Finn's office was tucked in the back corner of the police station, a cramped, windowless space dominated by filing cabinets and coffee-stained paperwork. Jim had aged since I'd last seen him, more gray hair, deeper lines around his eyes, but his handshake was still firm. "Adam, what brings you to my corner of the world?" he asked, waving me to a chair. "Information gathering. George Maxwell mentioned you might know something about Victor Thompson's gambling activities." Jim's expression shifted instantly to professional interest. "Your son-in-law, what's the context here?" I explained the situation briefly. The ultimatum, my departure, the discovery of Victor's attempted loan fraud using the forged documents. Jim listened without interrupting, the detective's pen occasionally scratching against paper as he took notes. "Victor's definitely known at the local casino," Jim said when I finished. "Regular player, usually at the poker tables. Staff mentioned he's been more frequent lately, playing higher stakes, which usually means he's chasing a loss." "Any idea how much he owes?" "Different creditors, different amounts. We've had calls about collection issues," Jim admitted. "Nothing criminal yet, but heading that direction quickly. I'd estimate 18,000 to 20,000 total." The numbers staggered me. 20,000 DUI. Victor had been living in my house, eating my food, demanding my respect while secretly burning through enough money to buy a decent new car. Who are these creditors? "Mix of legitimate lenders and less savory characters," Jim shrugged. "The legitimate ones are getting impatient. The others, let's just say they don't usually involve law enforcement in their collection methods." The threat was clear. "What's the timeline looking like?" "He's been stalling for about 6 weeks. Most creditors will give someone 3 months before escalating. Victor's running out of road." I left the police station with a clearer, colder picture of my son-in-law. The gambling explained his desperation, his attempt to fraudulently mortgage my house, and his increasing aggression toward me. I wasn't just a convenient funding source. I was his only hope of avoiding serious, potentially physical consequences. The risk had escalated again, moving squarely into the realm of safety. That evening, I sat in my motel room reviewing the day's progress. Legal eviction notice filed and ready for service. Confirmation of Victor's gambling debts and fraudulent activities. A growing network of professional allies who understood the real situation. I opened my laptop and updated my evidence file, adding Detective Finn's information to George Maxwell's revelations. Pattern recognition had been a crucial skill in my banking career, and the patterns here were becoming crystal clear. Victor wasn't just disrespectful or entitled. He was desperate, dishonest, and dangerous. The more pressure he felt, the more reckless he would become. I needed to be ready for whatever came next. The work of dismantling my previous life was almost complete. Now, the work of applying external pressure began. Tomorrow, I would start making strategic phone calls to Victor's creditors. Not to pay his debts, those consequences were his to face, but to ensure they knew his true financial situation, including the fact that he had no legal claim to my property. The truth was always the best weapon. Word travels fast in a town like Riverton. By Friday, I realized it was time to control the narrative. The stakes needed to move from financial legal to social, turning public opinion against Victor and in favor of the truth. My first encounter happened at the post office. Mrs. Healy, my next-door neighbor for 20 years, cornered me near the stamp machine. She was one of those women who collected information like others collected recipes. "Adam, dear, I've been hearing troubling things about family troubles," she whispered, leaning in. "Is everything all right?" I considered my response carefully. Mrs. Healy would repeat whatever I said to at least a dozen people by Sunday service. "Charlotte and Victor asked me to move out, so I did," I said simply. "Sometimes adult children need to handle their own responsibilities." Her eyebrows rose almost to her hairline. "They asked you to leave your own house?" "It seemed like the best solution for everyone involved," I replied, maintaining a neutral, weary tone. "But didn't you pay for their wedding and help them with the down payment?" She lowered her voice conspiratorially. "I always wondered how they afforded that house on Victor's salary." I simply nodded, but didn't elaborate. The facts would speak for themselves now that the silence was broken. My next stop was Michael's Home Depot, where I'd worked part-time after retiring. Michael looked up from his inventory sheets with genuine concern. "Adam, heard you're staying out at the Riverbend Inn. What's going on?" 3 other employees quickly gathered around as I explained the situation, focusing on the ultimatum. Their reactions were immediate and unanimous, shock that Victor had been so disrespectful, and anger that I'd been supporting them financially for years without recognition. "You paid for their college tuition." Dave, the assistant manager, shook his head in disbelief. "Victor told everyone his family was well off, said they were helping you with mortgage payments." "Victor said a lot of things that weren't true," I replied calmly. Michael's expression darkened. "That explains why he always seemed to have money but never worked overtime. We offered him extra shifts plenty of times." "Those commitments were probably at the casino," Sarah from the paint counter muttered. By the time I left the hardware store, I knew the real story would be all over town within hours. Riverton's small-town network was more efficient than any advertising campaign. My third stop was St. Mark's Lutheran Church. Pastor Hayes invited me into his quiet office. "Adam, several people have mentioned they're concerned about you," he said gently. "Can you help me understand what's happening?" "Pastor, I've been financially supporting my daughter and son-in-law for 5 years, I explained. Last weekend they made it clear that my presence in the house was conditional on my following Victor's orders. I chose to leave rather than accept that arrangement. That must have been incredibly painful." "It was clarifying," I said honestly. "I love my daughter, but I won't be treated like a servant in my own home." Pastor Hayes nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes loving someone means allowing them to face the consequences of their choices. It sounds like you've been protecting them from those consequences for a long time." "Too long, I think." During my walk back to the motel, I stopped at Annie's coffee shop. I found a small table in the corner and listened to the conversations flowing around me. Heard Victor owes money all over town. Adam Vance has been paying their bills for years. Always seemed odd how they lived so well on his salary. The information was spreading exactly as I'd expected. My phone buzzed as I was leaving. Mrs. Healy. "Adam, I hope you don't mind me calling. I wanted you to know there's been a lot of shouting at the house lately, mostly Victor, but Charlotte too. Yesterday, the police drove by twice. Thank you for letting me know, Mrs. Healy. I appreciate you keeping an eye on things. That evening, I sat in my motel room. The social pressure was building naturally. My phone rang again. Unknown number, but I recognized the area code, one of Victor's creditors most likely. I let it go to voicemail. The message: This is Marcus Webb from Frontier Financial Services. We're looking for Victor Thompson regarding a past due account. Please call us at your earliest convenience. They were calling me because Victor had listed my house as his address on credit applications. More evidence of his deception. I deleted the message and opened my laptop. Time to update my evidence file. I knew my actions had triggered a clock I couldn't stop. They were running out of time, and I was tightening the screw. The eviction notice was probably being served right now. What would Victor do when he finally realized the game was completely over? I should have expected them to fight back. Victor never was one to go down quietly. Saturday morning started peacefully enough. I was reviewing bank statements over coffee when my phone began ringing. First Michael from the Home Depot, then Mrs. Healy, then Pastor Hayes. Each call brought the same disturbing news. Victor was making rounds through town, spreading an alternative version of events. Adam, I think you need to know what he's saying. Michael's voice carried barely controlled anger. He came in here about an hour ago, loud as you please, telling everyone you abandoned them without warning, claims you promised to always take care of them, then changed your mind out of spite. What exactly did he say? I asked, keeping my hand steady on my coffee mug. That you're having some kind of mental breakdown, said you threw them out because Charlotte wouldn't let you control every decision in their lives. Michael paused. He's also claiming there's a family medical emergency that requires money, and you're refusing to help. I thanked Michael and hung up. Victor was desperate enough to launch a public relations campaign, which meant the pressure from his creditors was intensifying. He had escalated the stakes from social to public. The next call confirmed my suspicions. Mr. Vance, this is Detective Finn. I wanted to give you a heads up. Victor Thompson was here this morning filing a complaint about elder abuse. Elder abuse. Complete nonsense, of course. Complete. But he's trying to create an official record of your supposed mental incompetence, Jim continued. I told him we'd need medical documentation and witness statements, which he obviously can't provide. 20 minutes later, my phone rang again. Charlotte's number. Dad, please pick up. I know you're angry, but there are things you don't understand. Her voice was thick with tears. I'm pregnant, Dad. The stress from all this is making me sick. The doctor says if things don't calm down, I could lose the baby. I felt a familiar twist in my stomach, the same protective instinct that had made me vulnerable to their manipulation for years. But something in her tone seemed rehearsed, calculated. Congratulations on the pregnancy, sweetheart, I said, my voice measured. When did you find out? Last week, right before everything fell apart. Her voice broke convincingly. Dad, I can't lose my baby because of money problems. You always said family comes first. Family does come first, I agreed. That's why I spent $60,000 on your education and $25,000 on your wedding. But what about now? What about your grandchild? If she was really pregnant, if there was really a medical crisis, then my actions could have unintended consequences. But the timing seemed too convenient. Charlotte, have you seen a doctor about these pregnancy complications? A pause. I have an appointment next week. Which doctor? Dr. Richards at the women's clinic. I knew Dr. Richards. I'll call her office to see how I can help with medical expenses. Dad, you don't need to call. If there's a genuine medical emergency involving my grandchild, I want to help. Dr. Richards will know the best way to handle things. Charlotte's voice became sharp, betraying the act. You can't just call my doctor. That's private information. You're right. You can have her call me directly to discuss payment options. The line went dead abruptly. The emotional manipulation was over. An hour later, I was walking downtown when I encountered Victor outside Riverbank. He was talking loudly to anyone who would listen. He's lost his mind, Victor was saying to a small crowd of customers. Senile old man thinks everyone's trying to steal from him. Kicked his own pregnant daughter out of the house over nothing. I approached calmly. The crowd noticed me before Victor did. Victor spun around, his face flushing red. There he is, the man who abandoned his own family. "Hello, Victor," I said, keeping my voice level. "How's the gambling debt situation working out?" The accusation hit him like a physical blow. "You're crazy," Victor sputtered. "I don't know what you're talking about." $18,000 according to Detective Finn, the local casino, mostly poker tables. I looked at the gathering crowd. Amazing how much money someone can lose when they're not paying their own living expenses. Victor's face went from red to purple. He stepped closer. "You senile old bastard. You can't just—" "I can document every dollar I've spent supporting you for 5 years," I interrupted, my voice sharp and cold. "Can you document where your paychecks went?" Victor realized he'd lost control of the narrative. "Come on," he growled, pushing through the crowd. "This isn't over, Adam." I watched him storm away. The real story would be all over social media within the hour. Back at the motel, I opened my laptop. Victor's counterattack was failing because it was built on lies that couldn't withstand scrutiny. The community knew my character too well, but the pregnancy claim still worried me. I needed verification. I picked up my phone and dialed Dr. Richards' office. Victor's public threats had crossed a line. I walked back to my motel room, pulled out my phone, and called Detective Finn. "Jim, we need to talk. Victor's behavior today showed a pattern of escalation that concerns me. He confronted me publicly, made threatening gestures, and his whole demeanor suggested someone losing control." "I'd like to file a formal complaint and explore protection options," I said. "Come in tomorrow morning. Bring any documentation you have." But I didn't need to wait until morning. The knock on my door came an hour later from Steve, the Riverbend Inn night manager. "Mr. Vance, that man who was yelling in our parking lot earlier," Steve said. "He came back about 20 minutes ago, stood outside your door for maybe 5 minutes, then left, made some guests nervous." "Did he say anything specific?" "Muttered something about teaching old fools lessons. I've got it on security video if you need it." Security footage. Physical evidence of Victor's threatening behavior on private property. "Steve, would you be willing to provide that footage to the police?" "Absolutely." Guy like that shouldn't be intimidating elderly residents. The physical threat was real. The evidence was secured. I was getting a restraining order, and it was going to be served with the eviction notice. The next morning, I arrived at the police station with Steve's security USB drive and a written timeline of Victor's escalating behavior. Detective Finn reviewed everything. "Adam, this shows a clear pattern of intimidation," Jim said. "Combined with what I witnessed yesterday at the bank, we have grounds for a restraining order." "What would that involve?" I asked. "A legal prohibition against Victor coming within 500 feet of you or your property. Violation means immediate arrest." Jim leaned back in his chair. "There's something else you should know. Victor consulted with a lawyer Friday about adverse possession laws." The words hit me like cold water. Squatters' rights. "Exactly," Jim confirmed. "He was researching whether he could claim legal ownership of your house based on living there continuously. Montana requires 5 years of hostile occupation. They've been there 3 years. The implications staggered me. Victor hadn't just been freeloading. He'd been executing a long-term plan to steal my family home. Does he have any legitimate claim? None whatsoever. Adverse possession requires hostile occupation without the owner's permission. Since you gave them permission to live there, and they never paid rent or property taxes, there's no legal basis." Jim pulled out a file folder. "But it shows premeditation. He's been planning this theft for years." "What about the restraining order?" "I can fast-track it given the evidence. You'll have it by this afternoon." I left the police station with a new, definitive understanding of my son-in-law's character. The beer incident hadn't been about establishing dominance. It had been about maintaining a deception that would culminate in stealing my home. Walking back to my car, I pulled out my phone. Time to make some strategic calls. The first was to Marcus Webb at Frontier Financial Services. "Mr. Webb, I'm returning your call about Victor Thompson. I need to clarify something important. He doesn't live at my address anymore and has no legal claim to my property." He listed that address as his residence on all credit applications. He was a guest in my home. I evicted him last week. If you're looking for him, he works at Mountain View Auto Dealership on Highway 93. The second call was to Continental Credit Recovery. This is Adam Vance. You've been calling about Victor Thompson's debts. I want to clarify that Mr. Thompson has no ownership interest in my property and is no longer residing there. Each call was brief and factual. Victor's carefully constructed house of cards was about to collapse. That afternoon, Judge Morrison signed my restraining order. Victor Thompson was now legally prohibited from coming within 500 feet of me or my property. Violation would result in immediate arrest and possible jail time. I drove back to the Riverbend Inn, feeling the satisfaction of justice properly applied. Victor had spent 3 years planning to steal my home. Now he couldn't even approach it legally. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This isn't over, old man." I forwarded the message to Detective Morrison, then blocked the number. Evidence collection had become second nature. I was getting a restraining order, and it was going to be served with the eviction notice. Monday morning, I filed the restraining order. By noon, I was watching Victor's world collapse from multiple directions. The courthouse clerk stamped the final copy. "Mr. Vance, this order is effective immediately. Any contact or approach within 500 feet constitutes a violation." I thanked her and walked to my car, knowing the sheriff's deputy would serve Victor the papers within hours. My phone was already ringing. "Adam, this is Mike from Mountain View Auto." Mike was Victor's boss. "I need to ask you something directly. Are the things Victor's been saying about you true?" "What has he been saying?" "That you had some kind of breakdown and threw him out because of dementia, that there's a family medical emergency and you're refusing to help." Mike's voice carried skepticism. "Thing is, Adam, I've known you for 20 years. Mike, Victor gave me an ultimatum to obey his orders or leave. I chose to leave. There's no medical emergency and my mental faculties are fine, as my banker, lawyer, and police detective can confirm." A long pause. "I was afraid of that. Adam, I've got 3 customers today who mentioned Victor owing them money. One recognized him from the casino. This is affecting my business." "I understand. I'm going to have to let him go. Can't have this kind of controversy around customers who trust us with major purchases." 20 minutes later, I was having coffee at Annie's when I saw the first debt collector pull up to my former house, Continental Credit Recovery, based on the magnetic door sign. My phone rang. Charlotte's number. "Dad, there are men at the house asking about Victor's debts. They want to know about our assets, our income, everything." "What did you tell them?" "I told them the truth, that Victor doesn't own my property and no longer lives there. But they're talking about garnishing wages, seizing assets. Dad, I don't understand any of this." "Sweetheart, that's what happens when someone borrows money they can't repay. Those are consequences Victor created, not me. He owes $18,000. How is that possible?" So she really hadn't known the full extent. Gambling debts. The local casino, according to Detective Finn. Silence on the line. "He told me he was working overtime those nights." "I'm sorry you're learning this way, Charlotte. And the sheriff's deputy was here too. Served Victor some kind of legal papers. He's been ranting and throwing things ever since." "The restraining order." "Dad, he's talking about leaving town. Says there's nothing left here for him. What am I supposed to do?" "Make decisions based on who Victor really is, not who you hoped he was." That evening, I parked across the street from my former house and watched the chaos unfold. 3 different creditor vehicles had visited during the day. Mrs. Healy, the neighbor, waved at me sadly. Through the living room window, I could see Victor and Charlotte arguing. His gestures were aggressive. Hers looked defensive, frightened. The marriage built on my financial foundation was crumbling. My phone buzzed. A text from Steve at the Riverbend Inn. "That guy tried to get in the building again, told him about the restraining order." I forwarded the message to Detective Morrison. Victor was violating the restraining order within hours of being served. His desperation was making him reckless, which made him dangerous, but it also made him predictable. A desperate man with gambling debts, no job, and legal troubles had limited options. He could face his responsibilities, or he could run. Running seemed most likely. If Victor fled town, what would happen to Charlotte? The consequences were theirs to face. I'd chosen dignity. Now they could choose their own path forward. 2 days of watching their desperation was enough. I called Charlotte Wednesday morning and told her to meet me at the diner. Just her. I can't leave Victor alone right now, Dad. He's really struggling with everything that's happening. Then we have nothing to discuss, I replied. The restraining order means I can't be around him anyway. A long pause. Where do you want to meet? Main Street Diner, 2 Nhau, back corner. A booth where we can talk privately. I arrived early. When Charlotte arrived, she looked older than her 28 years. She slid into the opposite seat and immediately started talking. Dad, I know you're angry, but Victor's lost his job, and these debt collectors won't leave us alone. The phone rings constantly. I waited until she finished. I'm offering you one chance to end this with some dignity, Charlotte. What do you mean? Public acknowledgement of the truth, full disclosure of how much I've supported you both, and an honest explanation of why I left. Her face flushed. You want me to humiliate myself in front of the whole town? I want you to tell the truth. There's a difference. What kind of acknowledgement? Church announcement Sunday during testimony time. Letter to the editor of the Tribune. Facebook post visible to all our mutual connections. Full details about college tuition, wedding costs, mortgage payments, and the ultimatum that caused me to leave. Dad, people will think you had a father who loved you enough to sacrifice his retirement security for your happiness, and that you took it for granted until it was gone. Charlotte stared at her untouched coffee. What about Victor? Victor is no longer part of any equation involving me. The restraining order is permanent. If you choose to stay married to him, that's your decision. But it means choosing him over any relationship with me. You're asking me to choose between my husband and my father. I'm asking you to choose between a man who threatened me and a man who raised you. She was quiet for a long moment. What about the house? It's been in our family for generations. It's going to the Montana Veterans Housing Initiative. 3 families of veterans will live there. People who understand what service and sacrifice actually mean. The words hit her like a physical blow. The will already changed, witnessed, signed, and filed with my attorney. Even if you do everything I've asked perfectly, the house won't come back to you. That decision is final. Why? Because I need to know that any reconciliation between us is based on love, not inheritance expectations. For 5 years, you treated me like a convenient funding source. Charlotte's eyes filled with tears. I'm sorry, Dad, I really am. Sorry isn't enough anymore, sweetheart. I need to see actions. What if I can't do it? Then you'll live with the consequences of that choice. Victor will probably leave town to escape his creditors. You can go with him. Or you can stay here and try to rebuild your life with honesty. And if I do what you're asking, then maybe over time we can build a real relationship. How long do I have to decide? Sunday morning. Church starts at 10 cries. If you're not there to tell the truth, I'll know you've made your choice. She stood slowly. Dad, do you think you could ever forgive me? Forgiveness and trust are different things, Charlotte. I forgave you the day I decided to leave rather than fight, but trust has to be earned back, one honest action at a time. I finished my cold coffee. The ultimate weapon wasn't money or the law. It was the truth, delivered publicly. Sunday morning arrived clear and cold. I walked into St. Mark's, wondering if Charlotte would find the courage to tell the truth. The sanctuary was fuller than usual. I took my regular pew, 3 rows from the front, and waited. When testimony time came, Charlotte stood from the back row. She looked small walking down the center aisle. At the podium, she gripped the edges. I need to tell you all something important about my father, her voice carried clearly. For the past 5 years, Adam Vance has been supporting my husband and me financially. He paid $160,000 for my college education. He paid $25,000 for my wedding. Murmurs rippled through the congregation. He gave us his family home. When we couldn't make mortgage payments, he paid them. When we needed groceries, utilities, car insurance, he paid for everything while living on Social Security. Her voice strengthened. 3 weeks ago, when my father wouldn't follow my husband's orders like a servant, we gave him an ultimatum: obey Victor or leave his own house. Dad chose to leave rather than surrender his dignity. I stood by and watched my husband disrespect the man who sacrificed his retirement security for our comfort. I chose loyalty to someone who threatened my father over loyalty to the man who raised me with love and patience. I'm standing here because my father offered me one last chance to choose truth over pride. I was wrong. Victor was wrong. My father deserved gratitude and respect. She looked directly at me. Dad, I'm sorry isn't enough for what we put you through, but I'm hoping it's a start. The congregation erupted in supportive murmurs. Pastor Hayes approached the podium. After the service, people approached me. Mrs. Healy squeezed my hand. We all suspected you were helping them financially, Adam. Michael clapped my shoulder. That took real character, what you did. The most meaningful moment came when Charlotte approached me outside the church. The letter to the Tribune will run Wednesday. The Facebook post goes up tonight. Victor left town yesterday, packed his truck while I was at work and disappeared. I'm sorry your marriage ended this way. I'm not, she said quietly. I filed for divorce this morning. Found out he'd been using my credit cards for gambling without telling me. The debts are worse than we thought. 3 months later, I stood in the front yard of my former family home, watching 3 veteran families move into the transitional housing units. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos directed her 2 children toward the playground. Mr. Miller, this opportunity means everything to us. Veterans understand sacrifice, I replied. This house should serve people who've actually earned it. My own life had settled into peaceful routines at the lakeside cabin I'd purchased, morning coffee on the deck overlooking Flathead Lake. My phone buzzed with a text from Charlotte. Dad, I'm 3 months into counseling. Could we try having coffee sometime? I'd like to earn your trust back, one conversation at a time. I smiled. Charlotte had kept her word. I typed back, coffee sounds good. Saturday morning at the diner. Her response came immediately. I'll be there. And Dad, thank you for not giving up on me completely. I set the phone aside. Sometimes patience and dignity were rewarded. The sun was setting over the Rockies. In the distance, I could hear children laughing. Justice served, dignity preserved, and maybe, just maybe, a daughter ready to earn back her father's trust. It had been worth the wait. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and consider subscribing. You can also drop any comment below, even just one word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from, or what time it is right now. Sometimes one word is enough to say you were here.